Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir David Amess was my best and oldest friend in politics. So I confess that I'm hurting terribly. And I hope the House will therefore forgive me if, because of that, my contribution this afternoon is even more incoherent than usual. I certainly cannot match those two beautiful and, if I may so, extremely moving tributes from the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. Thank you. Everything I ever learned about how to be a constituency MP, I learned from David Amess. He sponsored me for the candidates list and he mentored me when I arrived. Without him, I would never have become a Member of Parliament. So some might well argue he has much to answer for. I grew up in Basildon when David was the local MP. I grew up on a working-class council estate, which even the locals nicknamed Alcatraz. David helped me to campaign in 1991 to win election onto Basildon Council. Quite a robust place to learn your trade. Once described as the only local authority in Britain where at council meetings the councillors actively heckled the public gallery. I was there. Trust me, I'm a politician. In return, I ran his ground war in his iconic defence of Basildon in 1992. During that campaign, Mr. Speaker, the late Paul Channon came down from Southend to help, and we were out canvassing on a council estate in Pitsea. I'll never forget it. We knocked on this door, and this monster of a bloke opened the door, and he looked at us both, and he looked at the blue rosettes, and he said, "Conservative? Tory? You must be bloody joking, mate. I'm voting for that David Amess." And I said, "I know when I'm beat, sir. Well done." And my partner Olivia and I were due to be on his table at the South and West Conservatives' annual dinner on the day that he was called. But David is now our fallen comrade, sir. He was a devoted and a loving family man, and our deepest sympathies are with his widow, Lady Julia, and his 5 children, who produced the most amazingly courageous statement yesterday, the essence of which I think was that love must conquer hate. And I'm sure, sir, we all agree with that. He was an animal lover, a patriot, a Thatcherite, a Eurosceptic, a monarchist, and a staunch Roman Catholic, whose faith sustained him throughout his life, and he was a truly great friend in need. I can vouch for that. And a fine parliamentarian. He was probably the best potential father of the House we will now never have. He had a zest for life. He had a joie de vivre. For him, the glass was never half empty. It was 3/4 full. He was a doughty champion for Basildon and then for Southend. So thank you, Prime Minister, and Her Majesty, and the Privy Council for making Southend a city after all. It was the right thing to do. And our apologies to Cleethorpes. While you're at it, if you can help Southend United, they're having a bit of a They really need, sir, all the help they can get. But you never knew what David was going to do next. That Essex cheeky chappy smile, that impish Amess grin, always with some hint of gentle mischief standing behind it. He once even persuaded His Holiness the Pope to bless a boiled sweet. But my friend and neighbour will explain in a moment, Mr. Speaker. But he did have a serious side too, and it's on that which I really want to focus the rest of my contribution today. In the last few years, David had become increasingly concerned about what he called the toxic environment in which MPs, particularly female MPs, were having to operate. He was appalled by what he called the vile misogynistic abuse which female MPs had to endure online, and he told me very recently that he wanted something done about it. 3 years ago, 3 years, my right honourable friend for Mid-Bedfordshire wrote a powerful article about this on Conservative Home, in which he quoted the following social media post. I want to see you trapped in a burning car and watch the heat from the flames as they melt the flesh from your face. I ask you, Mr. Speaker, what did she do to ever deserve that? Another fallen comrade, Jo Cox, whose sister now graces this place, said we have more in common than divides us. And I think she was absolutely right. Mr. Speaker, all of us, wherever we come from, came here to try and help people. We may disagree, sometimes passionately, about how best to help people, but surely we can all agree that we came here to try, for which we are now systematically vilified, day after day. And I simply say to you, ladies and gentlemen, that enough is enough. Because we all have absolutely one thing in common. We are legislators. So I humbly suggest, Mr. Speaker, we get on and do some legislating. I suggest that if we want to ensure that our colleague didn't die in vain, we collectively, all of us, pick up the baton, regardless of our party, and take the forthcoming online harms bill and toughen it up markedly. So let's put, if I may be so presumptuous, David's law onto the statute book, the essence of which would be that while people in public life must remain open to legitimate criticism, they can no longer be vilified or their families subject to the most horrendous abuse, especially from people who hide behind a cloak of anonymity, with the connivance of the social media companies for profit. The mood I'm in, Mr. Speaker, I confess I'd like to drag Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook and Jack Dorsey of Twitter to the bar of the House, if necessary kicking and screaming, so they can look us all in the eye and account for their actions, or rather their inactions, which make them even richer than they already are. And let's do that for all of our councillors, who are sick and tired of reading on Facebook after every planning committee the night before that, well, it must have been a brown envelope job. Let's do it for all those other people who hold surgeries, for GPs, who have carried on tending to the sick throughout the pandemic, but who are now being vilified online, along with their loyal receptionists and staff, just for trying to do their job. And if the social media companies don't want to help us drain the Twitter swamp, then let's compel them to do it by law, because they've had more than enough chances to do it voluntarily. So please bring in this bill, Prime Minister. And if you need any assistance in toughening it up, we're called the backbenchers of the House of Commons, and we're here to help. What better way to ensure that a fine parliamentarian did not die in vain than to enshrine one of his last wishes in legislation forever, for the benefit of all of those in public life? There were many who wished to pay tributes, Mr. Speaker, so I'll end with this. Another thing about David was his legendary timekeeping, or rather the lack of it. He was so popular that his constituency events always ran late. There were so many people who always wanted to speak to him. So by the end of a busy constituency Friday, of which he had many, he was sometimes running up to an hour late. He invariably overran. And so in his honour this afternoon, so I'm afraid have I. Sorry. But because of this wonderful trait, what better fault to have than that? Among some of his closest friends, he was known affectionately as the late Sir David Amess. Well, now he really is the late Sir David Amess, isn't he? But I am absolutely determined, and I ask for your support in this, that he will not have died in vain. He's now resting in the arms of the God he worshipped so devotedly his whole life. So farewell, David, my colleague, my great friend. In fact, quite simply, the best bloke I ever knew. I thank the House for its indulgence.